Very good afternoon, absolutely everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this midweek for ICDM's ongoing webinar series. It is Wednesday, and I do feel I need to say that because as all of us work from home, does anybody else feel that the days kind of merge into each other? So I think it's good to have a marker to tell you that it is in fact midweek and it's very sunny outside. If you're just joining us, thank you for your participation. But if you've been following us, this lovely series that ICDM has been organizing, thank you so much for keeping up with us. Before we start, just some housekeeping, which you've heard of earlier. Your mic is automatically muted, but don't worry if you actually want to contact us. You can look at your Zoom tab down there. You'll see two tabs. One is for Q&A and one is for chat. If you have any questions for our wonderful speaker today, type them into the Q&A box and we'll answer them at the end of his session. But if you're having any technical difficulties or any issues, please feel free to drop us a chat. Actually, it's also become a place where a lot of our wonderful attendees actually have some discussions. So that's also a good thing to keep an eye on. This session, of course, is recorded. We'll send you a copy after it is done. If you wish to leave the session at any time, you can. You'll be able to rejoin if it is still in progress. With all of that out of the way, allow me to introduce our speaker today, who's Sunny Koo, who's Managing Consultant and Founder for Human Synergy. His topic today, and I think it's quite apt, is managing HR for the long haul, the road to recovery. Now, the past probably a couple of weeks, we've heard a lot about the evolution of leaders and how they intend to sort of are able to take their organizations through this current crisis. But more than ever, I think managing HR for the long term is a strategy that nobody can kind of ignore at this point, and many need to take it into account. It is about taking care of your workers from all aspects, I feel, not just professionally, but with the other parts, probably emotionally as well. And I don't think I'm wrong in saying it's probably one of the toughest and most emotional decisions that any company will ever have to make. But that's my view on it, but this is not, but I think the person who will have even more insights is Sunny. So I hand it over to him to give his. Over to you.
Is it loud and clear? Audible? The voice? Okay?
Yeah, we're good. We're good. Sunny, go ahead.
Okay, I'll share the screen now. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Yes, it's been, this is the second of our what they call lockdown. I hope everyone is used to the new normal. Not easy getting used to the new normal. Having said that, let's get right into business. Okay, you will notice the slides that we're about to share is quite is mainly sharing of our what we call experiences working with clients right now, straight from the trenches, as I say. Before we go into the details of the HR imperatives and what HR areas that can be done, I'd like to share with everyone a little bit about this concept of VUCA, V-U-C-A. Prior to the pandemic, I'm sure some of you have already encountered the concept of VUCA, V-U-C-A. How does it then relate to the COVID-19 pandemic? In March 2020, this is just last month, they brought about abrupt changes. What used to work in the past is irrelevant. As a matter of fact, as we speak right now, a lot of things that we used to do are no longer relevant. How do we then manage changes? There are unpredictable variables. When will the virus reach its peak? You know, everyone's waiting for the not just for the curve to flatten, but when will it reach its peak and when will the situation normalize? So these are some of the questions being asked. Of course, there are countless variables affect on your external supply and demand. The entire supply chain is affected. You know, there's a lot of feeling around. You know, in the dark, not sure. You know, dealing with the unknowns. So if at all, the VUCA phrase is definitely more appropriate than ever. Well, what is this VUCA? V-U-C-A. Basically, VUCA is, V stands for volatility, U is uncertainty, C is complexity, and A is all about ambiguity. You can read the details of the slides later when it's being shared. Basically, volatility talks about things that is unstable, it causes uncertainty, and therefore there's bound to be a lot of complexity and ambiguity along the way. So that is VUCA for you before COVID-19. How then, what happened within COVID-19 and beyond COVID-19? We basically took cue from a book that is written. Beyond VUCA, VUCA 2.0 basically talks about from the V becomes vision, the U talks about understanding, the C talks about courage and adaptability. It's all about pointing today to the true north. That's what the author mentioned. So I think earlier on in the earlier sessions, Eric spoke about how leaders should reinstate their true north, how they should move forward with the right vision, given then, how leaders should do in terms of providing the understanding how to lead the company moving forward. And more importantly, leaders need to raise their head and also go beyond, have the courage. And obviously, at the end of it, needs to be adaptable. How then is this in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic? What would companies need to do? Before we go into the HR part of it, I thought it's interesting to share what I call a tip in terms of how to navigate through crisis from McKinsey. Basically, there's this 5R concepts that's being spoke about. To resolve, companies to be resilient, companies need to return to the plan and review the plan, and after that, reimagine, and then last but not least, to reform. So basically, what McKinsey and company has done in this short period of time, the research spoke about navigating through these stages requires strong people, strong leadership skills, and ultimately to standardize the business processes. What about HR? How would HR respond? Basically, the slides that we're going to show you, to show everyone is a compilation of the market practices that is basically fresh from the oven. We are currently consulting 3 companies right now to help them through the current, to navigate through the current situation in terms of the brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. So it's sharing of market practices, and also a little bit of sharing of how companies handle during the previous economic downturn. But obviously the question is it still relevant? What works in the past, can it still work right now? That is the question being asked. As the situation is evolving and changing rapidly, again, one of our key messages that we're saying here is that it's not so much about anticipating change, it's all about managing the transition. The change is bound to happen, the change is here to stay. How do we then manage the transition? And I think as you go through this current process, this talk about the new world order and how would HR respond to it, looking beyond the crisis. Last but not least, I think HR, this is basically not a financial crisis, it's a human crisis. Hence, HR leaders should take up the mantle and take on the challenge to focus on the human part of it in order to move on, to overcome and thrive in these challenges. 5 HR responses. We basically summarize in this short period of time in terms of, I'll share with everyone the 5 things to look at in terms of HR responses, the way we work, how do we achieve more with less? I think a lot of questions being asked on that. Is there going to be an impact on workforce management? How do we manage our people? How do we manage our manpower? How do you ensure the right people are put in the right job in times like this? And then the 4th point talks about how do you redefine performance? Moving forward, how do you then measure performance? And last but not least, is all about people first. Incidentally, HR is one of the top 4 organizational areas that the board is looking at based on the ICDM research done recently. So needless to say, HR is very key and very imperative in terms of helping the company, corporate Malaysia, to move forward. Okay, first point, the way we work. Prior to this pandemic is already happening. The way we work already started changing, more so in the Western world, especially in the US. According to the Gallup survey, way back in 2016, 43% of the workforce has already started to work from home. Okay, and then regardless of whether or not they showed the symptoms, according to the Gartner survey, which is quite recent, from 800 global HR professionals, 88% of the company have already encouraged and required people to work from home. From the Society of Human Resource Management, 54% already adopting flexi time, so on and so forth. There's the emergence of gig economy, freelancers, so on and so forth. So all this, regardless whether it's COVID-19 or otherwise, the shift has been moving towards remote work. So areas of consideration post-MCO, some of the questions are being asked is what sort of flexibility are allowed? Do you need to check in? Do you need to maintain communication, stay in touch? I'm sure some of you right now who's working from home, you need to make sure that you have proper Wi-Fi and you stay connected and so on. And I think some of the companies right now is trying to encourage through social environment in terms of using technology and so on and so forth. Interestingly, one of my clients even asked, the question, who's going to bear the Wi-Fi charges? So all these things are real questions being considered. So these are some of the things to look at in terms from the HR perspective beyond MCO. Following through in terms of the way we work, this is one of the key areas that a lot of HR, a lot of our HR clients asking us in terms of. It's strange, even in times like this, people still ask whether we do want to travel to high-risk countries or otherwise, go or no go, is there any restriction, is there any risk mitigation plan, how do we keep up to date with the MOH travel advisory, so on and so forth. So again, these questions are being asked, as we speak right now, we have one client who's operating in the red zone. They're asking that, although they are in terms of essential services, do they still operate, although in the red zone? Can they go beyond that? What about suppliers? So all these questions are being asked in terms of travel to high-risk areas. Again, regardless, based on the latest Gartner survey, the same survey that we spoke about, almost 97% have cancelled work-related travel. So if companies are moving towards that, how then in the future, how does HR going to manage the way we work in terms of how we travel, so on and so on, so on and so forth. In terms of time off policies, maybe it's not so relevant in terms of in the Malaysian context. What the Gartner survey said is that nearly half, almost 50% of the employers require their employees to use the sick leave first, followed by vacation leave, and then finally followed by paid time off in response to the COVID-19. 20% of the organization increased their paid time off for individuals who are sick, and so on and so forth. So as you can see, the shift is moving towards time off policies. So this is one areas where HR need to take note of to review the entire time off policies within their own respective organization. What about in Malaysia? 26% of the Malaysian workforce are self-employed. Most of it comes from e-hailing, food delivery, and online marketplaces. In the traditional workforce, even before this pandemic hit, the employee experience in the workplace was already changing. So as you can see, basically, I think you probably come across this phrase, technology is here to stay. Technology is not going to go away, but regardless whether COVID-19 or otherwise. Basically, COVID-19 forces technology to take place in a quicker pace. So the traditional workforce, bluntly put it, ain't going to work. So moving forward, HR need to consider different ways of working and different ways of getting people engaged within the workforce, within their workforce. This slide is a little bit blurry for some of you, but never mind. The subsequent slide will have more details on this. This is basically extracted. There is this interesting website. I suggest all HR practitioners should go and check it out. It's called workplaceless.com. It talked about the competencies required for remote working. What sort of competencies are required to move forward? I think some of the HR practitioners that we spoke to right now that all of them were asking that, how do we move forward? What sort of skills are needed? How do we manage workforce that is moving towards remote working? So these are some of the points you can consider. On the far left-hand side, it talks about the different levels of employee, from a worker to team member to remote leader, all the way down to the executive. On the other end, there is 3 buckets of competencies in terms of digital proficiency, how do you manage performance, and what sort of culture and growth. How do you manage culture and growth? Okay. So again, these are the details in terms of recommended competencies. As a worker, it talks about channel, mode switching, autonomy, time management. Time management is very crucial right now. As most of us work from home, you need to be able to balance between work and your personal life. And team member, intercultural communication, collaboration, adoption of technology, so on and so forth. And likewise, team leader, how to manage communication, executive level as well. How do you promote, how do you set company goals, set the right culture to sustain and promote what we call work from home model. See, all these things basically requires HR to rethink in terms of how you want to manage and govern the workforce. Essentially, the competencies required here will give a heads up in terms to the HR what they should be focusing at. But more importantly, HR action is along these lines. This is what we think from our point of view. WFM as in work from home is here to stay. Basically, COVID-19 hastened the process. HR needs to adapt and adopt the right technology to support work from home. I need to, like I can't mention enough further, to revamp policy and procedures. Okay, you need to have intentional peer-to-peer interactions. You need to have guidelines and rules for staying connected, and also to provide the flexibility and trust. Trust is a very important area here. I think Eric also spoke about it in his earlier session about leadership. Trust is an area, in times like this, trust is two-pronged. Not just trust in terms of trusting the employee to do their work, although they're working remotely, but the employee will also need to trust the employer in terms of how to navigate through these changes. So the trust bit works in a two-way sort of process. And the fourth point to look at is review the employment terms. Moving forward, HR need to consider basically full-time equivalent, full-time fixed term is not going to be the main way moving forward. You need to consider flexi, part-time, and even contingent workforce. The subsequent topic, we'll talk a little bit more about contingent workforce and what is this contingent workforce all about, and whether Malaysia is ready for contingent workforce. Okay, second topic. Achieve more with less. This is one of the areas that we are currently having spent a lot of time with our clients in terms of how do we then focus in terms of getting more with less. Basically, what our government is trying to encourage is the last resort is to go towards retrenchment. Workforce reduction is basically what we are advising every company out there is your last resort. The last thing you want to look at is workforce reduction. So there are many ways you want to look at before you even consider workforce reduction. Despite the fact that prior to COVID-19, there are several industries already being impacted due to the economic downturn and so on and so forth. Some of the things you can look at are basically cost of employee welfare and benefits, a lot of questions asked by our clients, can you reduce fixed allowances, in times like this? What is deemed as essential versus nice to have? Is there any legal and social impact? Obviously the case, a lot of clients asking us things like, what happens if you take up the wage subsidy program? It's going to last us for, it's going to be a 3+3 kind of concept. So for the next 6 months, they can't do anything with the salary. So can we then look into the allowances? So a lot of things as we speak right now is still evolving. So these are some of the things that we want to ask or HR would like to consider. But more importantly, the areas of productivity also need to be looked at. Okay. So what's the right action to take? How do you go beyond the people cost? We drew up a very simple matrix here to help clients to navigate through this scenario. Basically, what we're saying here is that if the company within the MCO or even during the duration of the MCO do not suffer a massive revenue loss, they basically need to stay afloat, okay? Perhaps undertake minimal interventions. However, if it's within the duration of the MCO, if the company suffer a massive loss, which we're currently working with one client right now based up north, their revenue has gone down 60% within the last 2 months. So basically, they need to scale down things, need to cut certain costs in order to survive. So that is depending on which quadrant you are in. However, if within the next 18 months, the company suffer minimal loss, you're able to what we call grow the business. All you do is just trim down, okay? Just trim down, no need to have any massive cost cutting. Just look at the areas, look at the fats where you can trim down. And last but not least, if the company, you need to look at beyond 18 months or beyond the 1 year duration, and you still have massive revenue loss, you need to transform. Otherwise, you won't last. Transform here simply means look at beyond just HR, look at processes, structures, so on and so forth. So these are the areas that we look at in terms of helping clients to navigate through these changes, through this current change right now. So it's all about weathering the storm to sustain a long-term, what they call sustainability. Where to start? The first wave of cut, basically, we're suggesting, we're recommending that clients to look at, organizations look at, cut the variable expenses, things like mileage claim, things related to travel expenses, so on and so forth. Apply a delay tactic. Delay tactic here doesn't mean you don't pay your staff allowances. Delay tactic here simply means that certain things that you want to implement, you may want to delay it. Certain things that you want to look at in terms of implement certain allowances, you want to bring about changes to some of the benefits and so on and so forth, you may want to delay that. That's the first wave. Cut all the variable expenses. Second wave to look at is basically optimize your total rewards. In other words, not just focusing into the monetary side of the reward scheme, look into the non-monetary side of it. Looking at things like things like intangible rewards, recognition programs, so on and so forth. Second wave, we also talk about right sizing, ensuring that the right people are put at the right place. And second wave, we'll also look at driving process improvement, how to improve processes. Okay, look at the non-value added, the kind of activities. Now's the good time to look into it. Third wave to look at is basically, that's where you start to go deep, to cut fixed allowances. Okay, still don't go for retrenchment, but rather look at targeted headcount reduction, not company-wide, but targeted. And then, of course, you need to look at closure of underperforming operations, so on and so forth. It's also a good time to look at some of your suppliers' concessions as well. And for longer term, that's where headcount reduction comes into the picture, divestiture, capex cut, and so on and so forth. So you don't have to straight go for the jugular in terms of the third wave and the longer term one. Start to look at trimming your costs at the onset. Some of the HR actions that HR can consider: do a cost benefit analysis, study the long-term impact, because ultimately, let's not forget, you need to ensure productivity. This is the time to work closely with the business. So I urge all HR to apply your business partnering skills at this point more than ever, and look at beyond internal workforce, look at the emergence of new skills, new talents, and so on and so forth, and balance between people needs and business sustainability. Ultimately, it's all about managing for the long haul. Okay, workforce management. Third topic. Is it the same concept? Is it same with the earlier topic about achieving more with less? Are we looking into automation? Again, as we speak right now, a lot of companies starting to pay attention to automation, pay attention to technology in terms of how do you achieve more using technology. But then the question is always being asked is there such a thing as optimal level of workforce? How do you deal with the supply and demand? Let's not even look into the supply right now. Are there enough supply out there? The latest stats that we shown that I've gotten just about before lunch, apparently our unemployment rate is not that evident right now. Probably it's not felt yet. So in other words, the workforce available out there that is looking out for job is not quite there yet. But is there a demand for such for positions to be filled? Again, I would say no. Probably. So in terms of how do you then look at what we call optimizing the level of workforce? But more importantly, what we are urging our clients or organizations to look at is basically look at internal talent. Now's the time more than ever to look internally rather than try to fix the entire manpower planning, fix the entire optimal level of workforce. Make sure that you have the right person that fit the role. There are 4 areas to look at when you want to ensure that the right people fit the role. What we call the 4 Ps. We start with the first P, which is performance. You want to ensure that that the person has the right performance level, has the track record in terms of performance level to take on this role. Having the right performance level, not necessarily this person has the potential. So that's where you need to look at in terms of leadership potential, whether this person, you move him to the higher role or different role, has the ability or potential to take on this additional role. The third P we need to look at is in terms of assuming the incumbent has the performance and has the potential, but as this person has a preference for this role. So you need to look at in terms of psychometric assessment to match the right personality for the job. And last but not least, you need to ensure that perception-wise, in terms of perception, in terms of conducting 360, having peer review to ensure that this person matches all the areas of 4 Ps to ensure that this particular talent fits the role. So now's a good time. Now's a good time. We are urging all clients to look at internal talent rather than looking into the manpower required, so on and so forth. Having done that, then you need to look at in terms of your long-term workforce planning. In doing so, one of the areas that we are suggesting clients to look at is also to look into this concept called contingency workforce. Moving towards creating a standardized cross-functional business processes, policies, and roles across business units. In other words, rather than I talk verbalize about it, let's look at the subsequent slides to talk about contingency workforce. According to the latest Forbes magazine, the current situation, see right now where most companies are facing, the focus is mainly to stay afloat, not so much on contingent workforce. However, in the long run, beyond this pandemic, the gig economy is here to stay. Okay, whether you like it or not, what they call the workforce in terms of gig economy, in terms of freelance and so on, is here to stay. So rather than fighting this trend, what the Forbes magazine says that be an early adopter and build your business model around it. So dedicate some portions of your labor hours to the flexible workforce, and as a result of that, companies may be able to should be able to attract the best and the brightest young workers. Okay. Closer to home, basically Zurich Insurance did a study, very recent study in January 2020. As much as 38% of the respondents in Malaysia who are currently in full-time employment are looking to enter the gig economy in the next 12 months. This is actually from massive stats in terms of 18,000 working age individual between the age of 20 to 70 to part of this global survey. And extracted from the Malaysian plan itself, the current Malaysian plan, 12 Malaysian plan, there are currently 13,000 people in the contingent workforce, mainly from the e-hailing food services, from Foodpanda, the Grab driver, and so on and so forth. The gig economy alone has grown by 31%. That is quite a staggering number. In 2017, I'm not talking about 2018 or current or 2019, it even surpassed the growth of the conventional workforce. So all these numbers are telling us that HR, you need to pay attention to this contingent workforce. So you need to look at how you want to dissect your company to make sure that you are able to cope with the contingent workforce. So some of the actions for HR is standardize some of your business processes, aim for automation, you need to study the optimal manning level, and then you need to conduct a person-to-role match within your internal talent. Engage with your contingent workforce, where to find this supply of contingent workforce, where are they, and how do you attract them. You need to plan beyond MCO. Okay, but ultimately start with what you have first. Like what we mentioned earlier on, focus on your internal talent, ensure that you have the right person fits the role. Moving on to the next topic, performance redefined. I have several clients asking us, does appraisal really matters right now after MCO? Does appraisal really matters? The thing's all gone haywire. You know, basically there's so much disruption. The VUCA that I mentioned earlier on, the VUCA World is here to stay. There's a lot of uncertainty. Goalposts keep shifting. You know, the line of sight is getting blurred. You know, whatever that you planned earlier on is not sustainable anymore. How then do you measure goals? So what we normally tell our clients that let's fall back on the principles of performance management in terms of managing performance. There's two big elements here in terms of what versus how, or outcome versus effort, and ultimately it's about KPI versus competencies. We'll delve a little bit more in terms of what does this concept of what versus how. The question being asked is always members of the board that we spoke to, which one really matters, outcome or effort? What about productivity? Ultimately, how do you link to rewards? So these are some of the questions being asked, not just at the board level, at the corporate leadership level, even obviously HR as well. So obviously the obvious question is HR ready, and what about the business? There's also questions being asked about e-appraisal, the effectiveness of e-appraisal, and then how do you manage performance remotely, and the elements of trust again. Okay, we'll dive straight into it. So as we mentioned earlier on, performance management is dual stream. It focuses on results in terms of what is expected versus how people is expected to achieve. So there's two parts here, results versus what they call behaviors and skills. Loosely put, it is basically KPIs and competencies. How then do you link to productivity? Which one, what we call link towards, is closely linked to productivity? Is it the what element or is it the how element? Before we go into that, let's go into this 2x2 matrix, yet another 2x2 matrix, can't help it, from the consulting firm. So basically, there is the effort on one axis, and then there's the results on the other axis, the vertical line. So in terms of if you put little effort and you get poor results, obviously this is mediocre. If you put a lot of effort and yet getting poor result, this is suicidal, it's self-sabotage. If you put in a lot of effort and you get very good results, this is what we call the Rocky syndrome, as in Rocky Balboa, no pain, no gain. However, if you put little effort and you get very good results, this is what we call the 80-20 space. In other words, you focus on the 20% that gives you the 80% results. How does this spell in terms of productivity? Again, what we're sharing with client, what we're telling client is that despite this being a guide, ultimately, you may not want to spend, in times like this especially, too much emphasis on results. I repeat again, you do not necessarily want to focus on outcome, results. Sometimes it could end up at the expense of poor behavior. Bear with that for a moment. Too much emphasis on results at the expense of poor behavior. In times like this is where you need to strike a balance, and you need to customize your PMS according to what you want to obtain in terms of the productivity level required. Okay. In terms of productivity, you see, it's not so much about what productivity level, in terms of how the challenge here that being posed is, how do you manage productivity remotely? Okay, again, more stats that we showed, that we discovered. You can't run away. Basically, moving forward, working remote is here to stay, as we mentioned earlier on. Okay, there are a lot of challenges in terms of manage performance remotely. A study done by EIU, Economic Intelligence Unit, found that 46% of the manager, almost half of the population of the managers foresee that massive challenges. So there are 7 tips in terms of managing productivity remotely. First thing is, share the big picture with your team, stay focused, make sure that everyone have equal access to what is happening, everyone have equal access for promotion opportunity, they feel part of the team, communicate clearly and often, having this video conferencing and so on and so forth, and then document everything. This is one area where we found out that in some companies in Malaysia, documentation part of it is not that happening. So you need to document everything, especially in situations like this where you work remotely. You need to have documents to substantiate the results. And then help your team bond, help everyone to feel like part of the team, because don't forget, you're working remotely, you don't see each other face to face. So you need to find ways to get them to bond. And then ultimately invest in technology to manage, to track their progress, track their performance progress. And ultimately, an engaged and happy employees produce better work. You need to get your employees engaged. Okay, this question is put forward because a lot of questions being posed to us by our clients as we work right now, as we're consulting some of our companies right now. What sort of measurements is important in current times, you know? So we did a quick survey from Harvard Law School. Basically, we're telling clients same thing as well, similar to what the Harvard Law School prescribed. Do it later. Adopt a wait and see approach. If ever, now is the best time to wait and see how your results progress before you even move forward. Set a threshold. Any company out there, when you set targets, make sure you have threshold. What's the lowest denominator, the lowest results that is required based on adjusted budgets and forecasts. And then draft your matrix or draft your performance measure with provisions. Allow flexibility. And consider alternative matrix, especially the qualitative ones versus the quantitative. Now is the time to look at the non-financial measure of the balanced scorecard. Financial outcome is no longer the main priority. So what we're suggesting to client, what we're recommending to client is that focus on the leading indicator that leads towards the financial results, which are usually the lagging indicator. Now is a good time to look at the other 3 quadrants of the balanced scorecard, which is the non-financial element. Again, this is just a quick illustration in terms of how do you link performance to rewards. The first one talks about linking KPI to bonus. Competencies is basically impacting your increments, so on and so forth. Second model talks about a combination of KPIs and competencies linked to bonus and increment. Third one talks about only KPI alone links to bonus and salary increase. I need to pause here for a while. The question is, in current situation, which performance elements matters? Or does it matter at all? Again, we don't have an answer right now, but needless to say, rewards need to go on. You need to ensure that performance is sustainable. You need to ensure that the performance level are being duly rewarded. So regardless of the model that you use, ultimately, you need to make sure that you reward the right performance level. HR action. So you need to review your entire PMS model, focus on what really matters between the what and the how that we mentioned just now, and address the trust issue at the same time. Work out a rewards plan to sustain and yet engaging performance. Have more performance feedback. Now is the time to have more performance feedback rather than the once a year formal appraisal. So now is the time to also tap on automation, to use automation in terms of tracking performance. And ultimately, it's about addressing short-term needs to sustain and planning for long-term growth. Okay, the last point. People first agenda. I think I'm running a little bit behind time, but I'll try to go as fast as I can. It's always HR's job, I guess, to help employee cope with the new normal. Okay, I'll let the slide run on its own, provide direction, contextualize the coronavirus for the organization, encourage internal peer-to-peer interactions, so on and so forth. A lot of this is self-readable. You can read it later on. But ultimately, what we want to say here is the key message is allow people to go through the change process. A lot of questions being asked in terms of how do you manage change. What we're saying here is that managing change is important, but what is more important is managing the transition. There's this bridges model that people would normally go through, the 3 phases the individual will go through when it encounter change. The first phase is about ending in terms of what you're currently doing, and you go through a neutral zone, you go through a neutral zone in terms of transition, and ultimately embracing the new beginning. So this model tells us that you can't just move people from ending what they do, straight away go into a new beginning. You need to allow for people to go down in terms of the neutral zone and go through a transition process before they're embracing the new change. So allow that to happen. In the process of allowing that to happen, these are basically the stages where you get commitment from phase 1 all the way to phase 4, from unawareness phase all the way to ownership phase. And these are some of the interventions that you can look at, from communication all the way down to performance management. What then are the HR actions? What's in it for the people? How do you manage the transition? Where to start? What can I do? Before you even embark on that, in any change process, there's always 3 groups of people. Again, luckily, they usually fall within the normal bell curve. There's a group of people who are cynical, cynics, okay? Obviously, majority of them is in the skeptical mode. And obviously, there's also another smaller percentage of people who are believers. What we're encouraging everyone to do here is that focus on the skeptics. Don't pay attention to the cynics, okay? Ignore the cynics, build on your believers, work on your skeptics. Ultimately, the cynics will turn over to the skeptics and ultimately become part of your believers. Don't waste your effort focusing on the cynics. Let this statement soak in for a while. What Max Dupree is saying, that in the end, it is important to remember that we cannot become what we need to be by remaining what we are. There is a 3A model that we normally help clients to sustain change. Take advantage of the moment rather than complain. So basically, seize the moment right now, take advantage, look at the positive side of it, ride the wave of change. You know, in COVID-19, obviously there's certain good things that's happening right now. Ride the wave, accelerate that change, and ride on those waves. And obviously affirm those changes and celebrate early success. Before we end, some key message and takeaway. Again, businesses need to stay the course and manage transition process and ultimately realize the change outcome. But a lot of questions are being asked by leaders. We spoke to a lot of business owners, a lot of CEOs. And they were asking things like, "What is the right decision to take? You know, what should I do? You know." So there is this model that we normally prescribe to our client organization in terms of making the right decision. It's never about making the ethical decision on its own, ensuring that it's legally right and prudent for the company. So ethical talks about ethical conduct, making the right moral decision, the right integrity, and so on. Legal talks about, you know, complying with the law, with your company's policies, and so on. Prudence is all about making informed decision in the best interest of the company. It's not so much on its own. The ideal situation is need to have a balance of, from the ethical perspective, from the legal side of it and the prudential part of it. I'll give you some quick case study here. These are all real scenarios. First scenario talks about an employee who has been in close contact with a suspected case of COVID-19. What is the right decision to take there? So the right decision is look at the three bubbles that we spoke about. Being prudent, you have to be very ethical about it, and obviously you need to make sure that whatever decision you take has to be within the legal realms. Second case as well. These are real cases, by the way. Employee has just returned from travel overseas. Although the country has not been marked as a red zone yet, that is before the MCO, by the way. So how do you then deal with such situation? Do you ostracize the employee and ask the person to take a self-quarantine or otherwise? So what's the right decision to make? Likewise, an influential employee who's your star performer and so on refuse to come to work out of fear of contracting the virus. So how do you manage all these scenarios? These are all real scenarios. So the things you need to look at, you need to juggle between the three bubbles that we spoke about. You have to be very prudent about it in the best interest of the company and the employee, but also you have to be very ethical about it, making the right ethical decision, and ultimately within the rules and policies. Okay, this is my last slide. In weathering this storm, the pessimist will complain about the wind, the optimist expects it to change, the realist will adjust his sails. All of us here, including HR, need to equip and prepare for the inevitable. With that, I end the session and pass over to Nadia.
Thanks a lot for all those insights, Sunny. I mean, it is actually a lot to kind of think about, especially somebody who is a worker technically, and it is a little bit disconcerting sometimes to see, where things will have to go. But while you've been talking, we've had a lot of questions from all our attendees, but I think the broad scope, and you touched on this in your presentation, but I think more want to know, how do you measure the effectiveness of work from home? Because you kind of sort of, you actually had a little bit on it, but I think more people want more in-depth and an explanation. How do you actually measure work from home productiveness? Is there a universal checklist at all?
That's a very interesting question, Nadia. Basically, I don't think if you surf through the net, there's a lot of methods in terms of how to ensure that work from home is a successful one. But a lot of it stems from the fact that not just from the technological standpoint, I think from the cultural standpoint, and even from the work itself, certain works that just cannot be done from home. You have to accept that fact. How do you then manage that? What about those that can be worked from home? How do you make it a pleasant one? It's never easy. As we go through right now, I think a lot of us, some of us will be going through it for the first time in terms of working from home. But ultimately, from what we have observed so far in the current scenario, communication is key. Communication is always key. I think having said that, you need to make sure that the right policies are put in place to make sure that people log in. It's still work as usual, and a lot of people still, although they work from home, they may treat it like a semi-holiday kind of a paid holiday kind of stuff. But the reality is that you are going to work from home, and how do you log in? You still have to formally log in from 9 to 5. Is there a technology to make sure that happens, and what kind of policies and procedures that you need to check in and communicate with your fellow colleagues and also your superior for that matter.
Okay. I understand that, because it's also, funnily, some people feel, because different people cope with it very differently. I do get that some people probably feel, oh, maybe we are on essentially semi-paid holiday. But in my case, I feel like I've never stopped working. It's normal for people to want to answer emails at 11, because there's no kind of break, right, between what is home and what is work. I think that's another thing that people need to manage as well. Do you agree?
Absolutely, absolutely. I think what Eric mentioned earlier on in terms of being authentic, as a leader, you need to be authentic. See, the element of trust is so far important right now. you just imagine your staff is working, let's say as a leader, your staff is working at home. You're not sure whether the person is working or not, you see. So the element of trust is very important. And like I mentioned just now, is it all about outcome? Okay, you're going to do your stuff. I don't need to know what you're doing at home, as long as you produce the results. Or no, not really. I really do care. I want to see what the efforts you put in, the things that you put in to make sure that the outcome will be in line in what I have in mind. So the engagement part is very important. So that you can't take it away whether you work from home or otherwise.
In that vein, there's a question here from Grace Yap, and there was another question as well from Christina Chung, who's the head of business dev at work. So Grace is saying that trust is such a huge hurdle to overcome if working from home is going to be the way forward. You know, so how do you achieve that balance? You mentioned, as we were talking about how, maybe it's a check-in system, maybe it is regular engagement, but is there sort of a good model to follow in terms of what is a good working from home? Because Christina also mentioned something along the lines of how do you deal with like the non-performers, right? The ones who maybe are not as responsible. So the first part of the question is, how do you build this trust? Is there a good example to follow? And if somebody is not following, somebody has turned out to be abusing this right, how do you deal with them?
It's a very good question. You see, managing performance has become even more challenging in the current situation, like we mentioned just now. You may want to look at the respondent to ask this question may want to look at the areas of managing performance remotely, the topic on that. See, ultimately, performance make up of two parts, the what and the how element. What basically talks about outcome, the how is basically the effort. So in terms of managing performance, you can't have a fixed percentage of weightage between the both. We can't say, okay, everyone is on 50-50, 50% outcome, 50% effort. You can't really do that in times like this. So moving forward, certain jobs will have more emphasis on effort, certain jobs will be more emphasis on outcome. Offhand, I can't think of right now, but the current client that we're working with right now, in a nutshell, they're in the oil and gas industry. Certain jobs in terms of sales, the outcome is more important, outweighs the effort. So they're looking at, when you measure performance, is the sales outcome, not so much the effort that they put in. Certain jobs, the effort are more important, not so much the outcome. So I think you need to strike what is the right mix for different jobs and different functions. I'm not sure if that answered the question.
Well, I do think it is something to sort of take into account, but more specifically, Jeff, who's the CEO of Duo Pharma Biotech, actually did ask, do you know of any studies that actually show productivity levels of work from home versus the traditional way? Basically, do you have any extra reading for us, Sunny, that maybe all of us can look up?
Yes, I do. I can, after this, I can send it to ICDM to send to the audience. We do have some, yeah, there we go. I mean, we have studies on things like working remote, how does it impact productivity and so on. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But here's another question from Hanis Amira, where how do you get the top management to buy in with this remote working idea, especially once COVID-19 hopefully ends? We'll know it'll end. We'll get through it. But when things do get back to semi-normal, how do we make sure that top management does see that work from home is an option and not a stopgap?
Again, interesting question. I don't think there's a direct answer to that. I think different businesses will have different requirements. Like I said earlier on, not all businesses, even within certain businesses, not 100% of the workforce can migrate to a work from home, assuming that things go to a steady state after this. Again, see, the notion is that things will never be the same post MCO and once the COVID-19 pandemic settled down. So we need to look at it from a case-to-case perspective. But a lot of the research that we've done, a lot of companies that we spoke to, is definitely saying that work from home is here to stay. Remote working is here to stay. It's just to what extent percentages of it need to migrate towards this work from home. So in an indirect way, to all the leaders out there, to all the CEO out there, this is inevitable. is something that
Okay.
the company need to embrace. It's just to what extent and whether you're ready for it.
So basically, don't look at it as a band-aid, but look at it as the thing you will have to carry with you
That's
probably
right.
going forward.
And how you work around it.
All right. And then Monsi asked this interesting question because you actually mentioned in your presentation about the gig workers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now with the lockdown being enforced, a lot of gig economy workers actually realize they don't have any security blanket to be financially secure. And I basically completely sympathize with them, because it is that fear, I think, that a lot of people who are working now are going through, whether or not your job is going to be there in 6 or 7 months. So what are your views on the sustainability of remaining as a gig worker, which doesn't have like maybe the other protections that full-time employment carries with you?
That's also another very interesting question. I'll start with the good news first. The good news is gig workforce, the freelancers, some of it go into it by choice. Some of it is because they felt that it's more of their thing. They think, I mean, most of them, the gig economy, the gig workforce knows that they can contribute more on this mode. So in other words, they have more to offer. They are more agile. Their needs are in demand. So it's just a matter of time that the gig workforce, that the gig economy will rise. So in other words, they are here to stay. The current situation obviously doesn't allow them to perform some of their roles, but post the pandemic, the gig workforce is here to stay.
Okay, so they will still thrive.
They will thrive. I mean, the fact that the numbers are showing, see, a lot of research has shown that the workforce is moving towards the gig economy. There's nothing you can do about it in terms of like, oh, it ain't going to happen, not going to come to Malaysia, you know. So the stats are showing, it's very telling. The stats are very telling. So,
But how do you,
now,
but how do you deal with this idea of no safety net? I think, because that would deter some people maybe from going to the gig economy.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. I think as we speak right now, I think that on the plus side, I think the government is looking into it increasingly. Not just Perkeso and all the other statutory bodies looking in terms of how do you provide a safety net for this industry. So that's a plus point. The not so good point is probably is not at the rate that we wanted. It's something quite new. I mean, the Malaysia, our government is grappling with this concept of gig economy. So the fact that it gets featured in the 12 Malaysian plan, so it says something. It speaks volume.
It still needs to speed up, though. Can we agree on that?
Yes, definitely.
Speaking of skills, actually, Giale, I am so sorry if I mispronounce your name, Lou, and Lila are asking things about emerging from COVID-19. What are the skill sets now that people should be looking at? Should we emphasize on certain skills or talents so that the labor force becomes more flexible? Actually, this was a question I think previous speakers have also gotten, where, are you going to survive as a jack of all trades, or are you going to survive as a niche specialist? Which one?
Yeah, again, very, very good question. A lot of my clients, you provide way too much information. Just name me three, three will do. So I'll give three very practical competencies or skill sets that one must have in times like this. Number one is definitely time management, ability to manage time, to manage yourself for that matter, and second competency, second skill sets is all about having that people skills. You see, the communication skills, the way of now moving forward is no longer just verbal, face-to-face. You need to embrace technology. So in terms of communication skills, it has gone breadth and even depth for that matter. So so communication is far, far important right now. The ability of that empathy in terms of communication is very crucial. And then last but not least is being flexible. So what you're good at may not necessarily, see, what works in the past may not work in the future anymore. So you need to be able to be nimble, flexible, and adaptable. So these are the three skill sets or three competencies that one must have to thrive in this so-called new world order.
Okay. Sabrina Zainal asked this question about fresh grads, actually. Do you think this COVID-19 pandemic will affect fresh grads that are already sometimes finding it hard to get jobs?
Definitely. Not just they will compete with, I mean, among themselves, but also potentially there could be a group of people who probably have their work, what I call, retrenched and looking for a job. So they're just not just competing with those semi-skilled, semi-experienced people as well. So definitely they will have this issue.
Okay, we'll wrap up soon, but I just have this one question where Esri Nur Hussain was asking, is retrenchment under the influence of MCO, I assume during the MCO, acceptable under labor law? This is a bit more technical question for you.
Yeah, I think basically it goes like this. We always advise our client, retrenchment is the last resort. If you really cannot, see, whether COVID-19 or otherwise, employer always have the right to retrench. That you can't take away. Obviously, it has to be done within the IR law and so on and so forth, within the Employment Act. So that is a given. But within the MCO, here, see, there are some technicalities here involved. A lot of companies still asking the fact that if you took up the wage subsidy, you cannot do anything to that employee that is benefiting from this wage subsidy for the next 6 months. So it's 3 plus 3. So that's legal. You can't do anything about it. But having said that, a lot of companies also do ask me, what happened in the 4th month? The company really cannot sustain. You can't do anything about it. I really have to close down. Retrenchment sets in, and so on and so forth. I mean, if that happens, it's also inevitable. We can't do anything about it. So from the financial perspective, ultimately the employer has the right to retrench.
Okay, we'll end, but I do have this one thing for you, Sunny. I think more than anything else, as a person who's employed, will it get better?
Tough question. I'd like to be very hopeful. One of my the last slide says that the people that the realists are the ones that set the sails. So you need to prepare for this inevitable. We can only hope and pray, I guess.
All right. With that, we come to the end of our webinar for today. Thank you so much, Sunny, for all your insights. And I'm waiting for that reading list. Thank you to everybody who's here for participation and questions. We apologize that we're not able to accommodate absolutely everyone, but please just keep them coming. It's so much appreciated. And do feel free to go through the chat box. I did see some recommendations there as well. And there have been a number of active discussions in that space. So you can actually go in and read through that. Also, as always, we'd love to hear from you. Please use the survey link in the chat box or scan the QR code to provide your feedback to ICDM on that and the topics of interest. Online program series coming soon. Just watch this space. But if you want to keep ahead of the curve, you can email development@icdm.com.my or visit icdm.com.my. We will have another webinar series, same time, same place tomorrow. But if you've been following, the person who's presenting is a very familiar name. It's Eric Vermeulen, ICDM faculty and innovative thinker, and he comes all the way from the Netherlands. It should be both entertaining and educational. With that, we've come to the end. Thank you so much again, Sunny. Everybody keep safe and keep your family safe as well. See you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Nadia. Bye-bye.